The roar of the crowd hits you like a physical force as you step into the Colosseum. Dust swirls in the air, catching the sunlight streaming through the arches. You are one among tens of thousands packed into the stands, yet your pulse beats, with the same rhythm as theirs, carried by the thunder of voices. The air tastes of metal and sweat, a mixture of anticipation and blood. Below, the gladiators prepare. They are not faceless killers, but living icons. Bronzed muscles glistening under the Roman sun, scars mapping their flesh like medals of survival. To the audience, they are both condemned criminals and living gods, objects of both fear and fascination. You feel it too. The strange magnetism of the arena, where death and desire blur into one. Women in fine stolas lean forward, clutching the edges of their seats as the first fighters emerge. A patrician lady, her jewels flashing in the light, cannot hide the flush spreading across her cheeks as she watches a towering Thracian raise his sword. Beside her, a younger woman bites her lip as the gladiator's eyes sweep over the crowd. Everyone knows these men are forbidden lovers, yet stories circulate of noble women slipping into the gladiator barracks at night, bribing guards for moments of illicit passion. Their appeal lies in danger itself. Men who live on the edge of death burn with a fire no senator could match. The fight begins, brutal and swift. Blades clash, shields splinter, and the crowd surges to its feet. Yet amid the chaos, you notice something odd. The silence that falls when a gladiator lifts his helmet, revealing his face. Gasps ripple through the crowd, not at violence, but at beauty. Some women fan themselves furiously. Others whisper to companions, their voices trembling with excitement. Even men in togas, stoic senators, lean closer, eyes following every move. Murmured rumor reaches your ear. Certain emperors and wealthy patrons take gladiators as private companions. To own the body of a man worshipped in the arena is to hold a fragment of the crowd's desire in your hands. It is not conquest of land, but conquest of flesh, a performance extended beyond the sand. The match ends with one man on his knees, weaponless, awaiting the crowd's verdict. You join in the chant, "Mitte, mitte." Spare him, your voice mingling with thousands. It isn't mercy that drives the crowd, but hunger. Death would end the fantasy too quickly. Living gladiators feed the appetite of Rome, both, in the arena and beyond. When you leave the Colosseum that day, your ears still ring with cheers, but your mind replays other images. The curve of a shoulder, the gleam of sweat on sunburnt skin, the shared gasp of thousands at a single glance. Rome has taught you that lust is not separate from spectacle. It thrives in the same breath as violence, amplified by the theatre of death. Lavish Roman banquets weren't only about food. Ancient sources like Petronius Satyricon describe feasts where indulgence blurred into spectacle. Dishes, drinks, and bodies all offered for consumption. The invitation arrives on a thin sheet of papyrus, the ink still fragrant. By the time you arrive at the Domus, the marble atrium glows with lamplight, and the smell of roasted peacock and honeyed wine thickens the air. Servants in short tunics usher you toward the triclinium, the dining hall, where couches line the walls in a U-shape, ready for bodies to recline. You lower yourself onto a couch, the silk cushions sinking beneath your weight, and immediately your senses are assaulted. Platters parade past, carried by sweating slaves, whole pigs stuffed with sausages, fish glazed with wine, grapes dripping with honey. Yet it isn't the food that makes your pulse quicken. It's the people. On the opposite couch, a senator's wife reclines, her shoulder bare, her fingers lazily dipping into a bowl of figs. When she lifts her eyes to yours, the corner of her lips curls in a smile, a signal half hidden, half brazen. Around her, laughter and whispers weave through the clatter of plates. The host, a corpulent man with rings gleaming on every finger, claps once. At the signal, musicians strike their strings, and dancers enter. Young men and women barely clothed, their bodies oiled and glistening under torchlight. They move between couches, brushing against reclining guests, offering touches as freely as wine. You feel the tension in the room rise, like heat from the braziers that line the walls. A slave offers you a goblet, its rim sticky with spiced wine. As you drink, your gaze catches another scene, a patrician dipping his hand into a dish of oysters, then offering it directly to the lips of a boy seated beside him. The boy accepts with a blush, his eyes downcast, but his mouth eager. Across the hall, two women feed each other grapes, their laughter louder than the music. The air grows thicker, not just with incense, but with the smell of skin, wine, and desire. Conversations falter into murmurs. Fingers wander where they shouldn't, lips meet over spilled wine, and the boundaries between feast and frenzy blur. The banquet is no longer about satiating hunger. It is about excess itself, about consuming until there is nothing left to consume. You close your eyes for a moment, and the sounds layer together. The strumming of lyres, the slosh of wine poured. Too quickly, the suppressed moans of guests forgetting their status. In this room, Rome's rigid hierarchy bends and melts. Senators lie beside slaves, matrons brush knees with gladiators, and everyone forgets tomorrow's politics in tonight's indulgence. When you finally rise to leave, your body heavy with food and something more, the night air shocks you with its cool clarity. Behind you, laughter and music continue, echoing into the dark streets. You realize the Romans feasted not just to eat, but to erase restraint, to drown themselves in the glory of excess. And you, for a moment, were swept into their tide. Roman thermae were not just for hygiene. By the 1st century CE, baths became hubs of gossip, politics, and erotic encounters, open spaces where nudity blurred class and gender boundaries. You step through the arched entrance of the thermae, the public baths, clutching a small bundle of oil and a strigil. The air inside is damp and warm, thick with the mingled scents of steam, sweat, and perfumed oils. At first, the chatter strikes you. Dozens of voices bouncing off vaulted ceilings, senators debating policy beside merchants, matrons whispering, scandal, while attendants laugh at jokes too coarse for the forum. You leave your clothes with a slave at the apoditerium, the changing room. Nakedness is the rule here. Status, toga, jewelry, all stripped away. You walk into the frigidarium, the cold pool, your skin prickling as goosebumps rise. Bodies splash, dive, and emerge, the marble echoing with shrieks of laughter. But it is the caldarium, the hot steam chamber, that holds the true magnetism. You push through the heavy door, and a wave of mist engulfs you. Inside, men and women recline on heated stone benches, their forms blurred by vapor. You sink down beside them, the stone burning against your skin, and let the heat wrap you like a second body. In the haze, touches linger longer than necessary. A hand brushes your thigh under the excuse of shifting for comfort. Someone leans, in to whisper, their lips brushing your ear. Conversations slow, and silences stretch heavy with suggestion. From the mist, a group emerges, a wealthy matron with her attendants, their hair pinned high with jeweled combs. They glide through the room as if it were their own private palace, drawing eyes from every corner. One of her attendants kneels by the pool, scooping water into her mistress's hands. Another massages her shoulders, the oil glistening across, pale skin. Watching them, you realize this place is theatre as much as hygiene, a stage for intimacy and display. You move toward the tepidarium, the warm water hall. Here the mood shifts from quiet steam to playful splashes. Young men wrestle in the water, their laughter carrying through the chamber. A senator sits at the edge, his feet in the pool, pretending to discuss legislation, while his eyes follow the movements of a youth swimming past. Across the hall, two matrons whisper, their hands hidden beneath the water as they exchange secrets, or perhaps something more. Everywhere you turn, the boundary between casual touch and deliberate caress dissolves. Oil is poured across shoulders and massaged into thighs. Friends linger in embraces that stretch too long to be innocent. The bath is not simply about washing the body, it is about dissolving distance, about immersing yourself in a community of skin and steam. When you step back into the street, the evening air cuts sharp and cold. The clamour of the bath fades, replaced by the quieter pulse of Rome outside. But the heat clings to you, and with it, the memory of blurred outlines, whispered words, and touches that meant far more than they pretended. You are seated at the edge of a triclinium, a dining room designed for reclining rather than sitting. The air is heavy with the scent of roasted meats, honeyed wine, and exotic spices imported from the far corners of the empire. Golden lamps flicker on polished marble walls, casting wavering shadows across mosaics that depict gods in their own carnal adventures. Tonight, this is no ordinary meal. This is a convivium turned into theatre, where the food is only the prelude to something far more intimate. You recline on a low couch, a thin cushion separating you from the cool stone. Before you, wealthy patricians laugh with mouths already stained red from Falernian wine. Slaves move silently between couches, refilling cups, wiping spills, carrying trays laden with fruits, split open to reveal their sticky sweetness. A musician plucks at a lyre in the corner, though his song is almost drowned out by the louder rhythm of clapping and laughter. The banquet master rises, his tunic slipping to expose a fleshy chest, and makes a signal. At once, the slaves dim the lamps, leaving only a few flames glowing. Two women enter the room, veiled but nearly naked, carrying amphorae of wine. Instead of pouring into cups, they tilt the vessels into each other's mouths, spilling excess over their skin. The crowd erupts in applause. What begins as entertainment quickly turns into participation. Guests are invited to drink from each other's lips, to share figs passed from mouth to mouth, to let their bodies mingle as naturally as food and wine. It is not just lust, it is display. To join is to prove your status. To refuse is to risk mockery. By the time the final courses are cleared, the couches are no longer used for eating, but for entangling limbs. Somewhere between comedy and ritual, the banquet has become an orgy. Not everyone joins. Some watch, sipping wine, judging or secretly aroused. Others leap into the performance with theatrical flair, mimicking the gods in the frescoes above them. The spectacle is not hidden. In Rome, such gatherings are whispered about, but rarely punished. Senators participate, poets write veiled verses about them. Even emperors sponsor feasts where boundaries dissolve. The banquet is not merely about pleasure, it is about hierarchy. The host flaunts his wealth through imported delicacies, through the sheer number of performers he can command, through the audacity of turning dinner into a theatre of the flesh. When dawn threatens the horizon, the room reeks of sweat, wine, and smoke. You stagger outside, the marble columns cool against your hand. The city is quiet, but behind you, the echoes of laughter and moans still ripple in the villa. To the Romans, this is not debauchery, it is culture. To you, it feels like stepping out of one world and into another, where appetite knows no boundary. Rome, late April. The Floralia festival honoured the goddess Flora, but it was infamous for performances that scandalized conservative Romans. You find yourself squeezed into the crowded seats of a wooden theatre erected in the Campus Martius. The spring air is sweet, with the scent of blooming flowers, mingling uneasily with the smell of sweat from the masses packed shoulder to shoulder. The Festival of Flora has begun, and while it is officially a celebration of fertility and renewal, you quickly realize it is something far more untamed. The crowd roars as actors dressed in garlands leap onto the stage, their costumes little, more than wreaths of ivy and flowers. At first, the play resembles a comedy. Performers stumble, crack bawdy jokes, and toss handfuls of beans and seeds into the crowd. Children scramble to collect them, laughing as petals rain down from above. But as the performance continues, the jokes sharpen and the costumes slip away. What began as a farce shifts into a spectacle of nudity and pantomime. A courtesan steps forward, unveiled, her body painted with floral designs. She dances not with grace, but with deliberate provocation, swaying her hips to the beat of a drum. The men in the crowd cheer, shouting lewd praises, while the women laugh and exchange remarks just as bold. Prostitutes, given license by tradition, are free to join the stage. They mimic the goddess herself, stripping away veils as if to reveal the fertile earth in human form. Soon the performance dissolves into competition. Which woman can dance more provocatively? Which actor can deliver the filthiest line? It is theatre turned carnival, with boundaries deliberately broken. Wild animals are sometimes released as part of the games, hares and even goats bounding across the stage, while performers chase them, turning the scene into a parody of the hunt. You sit among the spectators, and the atmosphere infects you. Conservative senators frown, but remain seated, knowing protest would earn jeers from the mob. Others clap with abandon, tossing coins toward the stage in approval. One prostitute leaps into the audience, landing beside you, laughing as she smears crushed flower petals across your arm before returning to the stage. This is Rome at its most contradictory, a city that demands modesty in its laws, but delights in public license under the cover of religion. For 1 week, the normal order dissolves. Class distinctions blur as senators and beggars alike share in the crude jokes and the wild energy of Flora's rights. Women, often confined to private roles, step into the spotlight, mocking male authority with obscene gestures and songs. As the sun sets, torches are lit, and the performances grow wilder. You hear whispers of contests that will continue through the night, when the drunken crowd disperses into alleys and courtyards. What began as a festival of flowers has turned into a carnival of flesh. In the Roman imagination, both are tied to the same thing: the raw, uncontainable energy of life returning in spring. Rome's thermae, vast public bathhouses, were not just for bathing. They were centers of gossip, politics, and private indulgence. The steam wraps around you the moment you step inside. The thermae are not quiet sanctuaries, but bustling marketplaces of flesh and conversation. The vaulted ceiling echoes with splashes of water, bursts of laughter, and the low hum of political schemes whispered over warm pools. Torchlight glistens on wet skin, reflecting 1,000 shifting forms as citizens move between hot baths, cold plunges, and massage tables. You lower yourself into the caldarium, the hot bath, and immediately feel eyes on you. It is impossible not to be seen here. Senators sit shoulder to shoulder with soldiers, merchants with slaves, all stripped of their clothing, equalized by nudity. A man with a scar across his chest begins to tell a story about a recent military campaign, and those around him lean in, pretending interest in the tale, but allowing their eyes to wander. The heat, the sweat, and the proximity create a tension that feels more like theatre than relaxation. Across the room, a group of young men play a game, splashing one another and laughing loudly. The sound is too rehearsed, too exaggerated. You realize they are performing, hoping to be noticed. They move closer to a wealthy equestrian reclining on the marble steps. Soon, one of them drapes an arm casually across the older man's shoulders. Nobody pretends this is scandalous. It is simply part of the unwritten script of the baths. Attendants move through the corridors, carrying oils in clay flasks. You are beckoned to lie on a bench, where one of them begins to rub your shoulders with perfumed olive oil. Around you, others receive the same treatment, but some massages stretch far beyond the practical. The line between service and intimacy is blurred, and no one dares to draw it sharply. The air smells of sweat, resin, and incense. Conversations flow as freely as the water. One senator brags about his latest land purchase. Another whispers a rumor about a general's affair. The baths are not just about cleansing the body. They cleanse secrets from men's mouths, offering them up into the steam where everyone can catch them. What happens here often shapes what happens in the Senate the next day. But it is not only men. In certain hours, women too frequent the thermae, slipping into side chambers reserved for them. Though less documented, whispers suggest that their encounters were no less charged, filled with gossip, alliances, and indulgences shielded. From public scrutiny, you realize that in Rome, the body itself was political currency. To be seen here, to participate in these rituals of exposure, was to stake a claim in society. Yet beneath the laughter and camaraderie lies something deeper, a culture that accepted the blending of hygiene, politics, and desire as if they were one and the same. When you step out, the cool night air clings to your skin, but the heat of the bathhouse lingers, along with the memory of the stares and the whispers that followed you through the steam. The Colosseum, completed in 80 AD, held up to 50,000 spectators. It wasn't just about blood and combat, it was also a theatre of desire, spectacle, and forbidden encounters. In ancient Rome, gladiators, though enslaved and often despised, were paradoxically worshipped as sex symbols. Amulets, graffiti, and love notes proved that their blood and sweat carried an erotic magnetism. You are pressed into the crowd of the Colosseum, the roar of tens of thousands rattling your bones. Dust hangs heavy in the sunlight, swirling in golden shafts above the arena floor. Below, two men circle each other with blades drawn, the sound of metal scraping echoing louder than the crowd's chants. To most eyes, this is combat. But to you, and to the countless women who have pressed amulets into their palms, scribbled graffiti on walls, or carried tokens soaked in sweat, it is something far more intoxicating. These men are not just fighters, they are living embodiments of lust and danger. The one in front of you, a murmillo with a crested helmet, lunges forward, his muscles coiling, his chest gleaming with oil and blood. Each swing of his sword seems like a performance, each dodge and twist a dance designed to stoke the crowd's hunger. He is brutal, yes, but he is beautiful in his brutality. You can feel it in the way your breath shortens, the way your eyes refuse to leave him. A woman beside you, a senator's wife by her jewelry, gasps loudly, her fan clutched tight as if she might faint. You notice her hand dip into her cloak, gripping something hidden. A small cloth, rumored to be stained with a gladiator's blood. She presses it to her lips, as if it were a lover's kiss. You glance away, ashamed to witness her private devotion in a public place, but your own pulse betrays you. When the fight ends, the Murmillo stands victorious. The defeated man collapses, dust clinging to his sweat-slicked body. The Murmillo raises his sword, looking to the emperor for the sign of life or death. The crowd erupts, voices clashing like waves. "Kill!" Some shout, hungry for blood. Others beg for mercy. But your eyes are not on the fallen man. They are fixed on the victor, whose chest heaves with exhaustion and triumph, his body a paradox, of violence and allure. Later, in the shadowed streets, you pass the graffiti etched into a tavern wall. Celadus the Thracian is the delight of the girls. Another scrawl proclaims, "Crescens suspends my heart." These are not mere fighters, they are the idols of Rome's desire. Women slip into the gladiators' barracks at night, braving shame and punishment just to touch the men who spend their days spilling blood. Some take locks of their hair, others smear their cheeks with dust from the arena floor as if it were sacred powder. You realize now that this attraction is not despite their danger, but because of it. These men live on the edge of death, and in that fragile space between survival and destruction lies a raw magnetism that no polished noble or perfumed poet could ever conjure. You walk away, the roar of the arena still echoing in your ears. Your heart beats as if you too had fought in the dust and sweat. Rome has many gods, but in the Colosseum, the gladiator is the one who commands worship, not with temples or prayers, but with blood and desire. Roman feasts were not merely about food. They blurred into spectacles of sex, gluttony, and power. Writers like Petronius describe banquets where excess was the rule and indulgence became performance. The doors of the triclinium swing open, and you step into a room dripping with luxury. Marble pillars gleam under the flicker of oil lamps. The air is heavy with roasted meats, honeyed wine, and incense that clings to your throat like a warm hand. You are not just here to eat, You are here to witness Rome's appetite in all its grotesque glory. Couches line the hall, each draped with silks imported from the East. Reclining nobles lounge lazily, their fingers already sticky with figs and sauces, their laughter rising above the music of flutes. A golden platter passes you, its burden almost absurd. Peacocks roasted whole, their feathers gilded and reattached, as if the bird itself has been reborn for spectacle. Another tray holds dormice stuffed with nuts and dipped in honey, tiny delicacies, for men who devour provinces like morsels. You take your place on a low couch, the cushions sinking beneath your weight. A servant pours Falernian wine into your cup, so rich and heavy that it stains your lips crimson after a single sip. Across the table, a senator burps loudly, then bursts into laughter, slapping the thigh of the young boy beside him, who flinches, but smiles with forced charm. You realize quickly, food is not the only indulgence tonight. As the courses roll on, the room begins to blur. Tongues loosen with wine, and bodies press closer on the couches. A noblewoman leans over you, her necklace of pearls brushing against your arm as she whispers, "Try the oysters. They say they stir the blood." Her eyes linger too long, her meaning clearer than the dish itself. You obey, tasting the brine, tasting the suggestion beneath her words. In one corner, musicians strike up a bawdy tune. Dancers swirl into the room, their garments sheer, their steps designed not to entertain but to inflame. Guests cheer, tossing scraps of food and coins at them, laughing as one dancer catches a dripping fig in her mouth. The spectacle is no longer about grace, but about excess, about bodies treated as entertainment, just as the roasted pheasant is consumed without thought. Petronius once wrote of a banquet where every dish was shaped to look like something else. Sausages, formed like horns of plenty, pastries filled with live birds that burst forth when cut. Tonight feels like the living version of that satire. Here, nothing is natural, everything is exaggerated, twisted into excess. Even pleasure becomes grotesque when magnified this way. As the night deepens, the boundaries between feast and orgy dissolve. Grapes are fed mouth to mouth, lips stained red with wine, meat in careless kisses, hands roam as freely as the serving trays. You realize you are no longer at dinner, but at a performance of Rome's hunger, for food, for sex, for domination. The banquet is not about nourishment, it is about power. The power to consume without restraint, to blur the line between appetite and lust until they are indistinguishable. When you finally stumble from the hall, the dawn air is sharp and clean. But the smell of roasted meat and spilled wine clings to you, a reminder that Rome's greatest hunger is not for survival, but for indulgence without end. In Rome, religion and sexuality often overlapped. The cult of Venus, Bacchus, and other deities blurred sacred devotion with erotic ritual. Ancient writers hinted at ceremonies where prayer and passion were inseparable. You step through a colonnade into a hidden courtyard, the marble steps still, warm from the day's sun. Tonight is not a public festival, but a private rite, one whispered about in taverns and condemned in the Senate. The moon casts silver across the temple's columns, and in the flickering torchlight, you feel the weight of secrecy pressing on your shoulders. A circle of women moves slowly around a carved altar, their robes thin enough that the flames behind them paint their bodies in shifting silhouettes. You hear the low hum of a hymn, its words in archaic Latin, half prayer and half incantation. This is not the austere worship of Jupiter on the Capitoline Hill. This is the realm of Venus and Bacchus, gods who demand not restraint, but surrender. The priestess at the center lifts a cup of spiced wine. Her hair is bound with ivy, her eyes heavy with kohl. She drinks deeply, then passes the cup to the next, and soon the vessel circles, leaving each participant flushed and trembling. When it reaches you, the scent of cinnamon and honey stings. Your nose and the wine burns hotter than any vintage you have known. Your lips feel heavy, your chest warm, as if the drink itself is alive inside you. Chants grow louder, The women begin to discard their robes, not with shame, but with reverence, each movement part of the ritual. Nakedness here is not indecent, but sacred, an offering of the body as vessel and altar both. The priestess beckons, and suddenly you are no longer a spectator, but a participant, your pulse racing as the circle closes tighter around you. Hands press against your skin, soft and insistent, guiding you toward the altar. The stone is cool against your back as you are lowered onto it, surrounded by the rhythmic chant of voices that rise and fall like waves. Above you, the priestess speaks. To honor Venus is to know pleasure. To honor Bacchus is to lose yourself. The crowd echoes her words, and in that echo, you feel yourself dissolving into something larger than your own desire. In this moment, lust is not private. It is communal, sanctified, demanded by the gods themselves. The temple walls resound, not with silence but with cries of ecstasy, each one another offering, another form of devotion. You glimpse the flicker of torchlight on marble statues, Venus with her serene smile, Bacchus with his crown of grapes, and realize these stone faces are the true audience of the ritual. As the rite continues, you feel the line between sacred and profane collapse. Desire becomes prayer, touch becomes sacrifice. Every shiver, every gasp is a hymn, every act a liturgy in a language older than Rome itself. When the chants finally fade, and the participants collapse in exhausted silence, you feel drained, emptied, but also strangely reborn. You stumble into the night air, the stars above cool and distant. What you have witnessed and taken part in will never be spoken of beyond these walls, yet it will cling to you like incense smoke, proof that in Rome even the gods demanded passion as tribute. Roman baths were not merely places of hygiene. They were social arenas, business hubs, and often veiled theatres of seduction. Writers like Seneca complained that beneath the marble pools, gossip, lust, and hidden encounters thrived. You step into the steamy haze of the thermae, your skin instantly coated with moisture. The air hums with the mingled voices of dozens of Romans, echoing off marble walls carved with intricate mosaics. Pools of varying temperatures stretch before you. Caldarium, tepidarium, frigidarium, each one a stage for bodies in different states of relaxation. The smell is rich and intoxicating, olive oil rubbed on skin, incense burning in braziers, sweat, mingling with steam. You clutch a small wooden strigil, ready to scrape the oil and grime from your skin, but your eyes are drawn to the crowd. Senators recline on benches, their servants fanning them. Merchants negotiate deals with one hand, while sipping watered wine with the other. Young men laugh loudly, tossing dice on the wet floor, while women, admitted at certain hours, whisper behind gauzy veils, their eyes darting toward the bolder bathers. You sink into the warm tepidarium, the water closing around your shoulders, like an embrace. Across from you, a group of athletes lingers, their muscles gleaming with oil, their laughter sharp and playful. One catches your gaze and holds it longer than is polite. He drifts closer, the steam blurring the space between you until his shoulder brushes yours. The contact is casual, but deliberate. Everywhere you look, the bath is a theatre of glances and gestures. A woman dips her hand in the water, watching how the ripples lap against her neighbour's thigh. A pair of young nobles vanish through a side door, their giggles echoing faintly before being swallowed by the splash of water. Even the attendants, slaves with bronze jugs of heated water, move slowly, deliberately, pouring streams that linger a moment too long across their masters' backs. You lean back, closing your eyes, letting the steam dull your thoughts. But then you feel fingers brush your arm, not the accidental graze of a crowded bathhouse, but a beckoning touch. You turn to see a stranger, a man with sharp features and a half smile, motioning toward the curtained alcove at the far end of the chamber. You hesitate, but curiosity outweighs caution. Behind the curtain, The noise of the bath fades. The room is dim, lit only by a single oil lamp. The stranger pours oil into his hands and begins rubbing it across your shoulders. The touch is firm, practiced, working the tension from your muscles. But soon, the pressure softens, drifts lower, tracing the curves of your body with deliberate slowness. In the baths, such lines are blurred. Is this massage or something more? Here, nobody asks. Outside, voices swell with laughter and the splash of bodies diving into pools. But in the alcove, the world has shrunk to skin, oil, and the scent of myrrh. Time moves strangely in the steam. One moment you are being massaged, the next you are pressed against cool marble, breath catching in rhythm with another's. In Rome, even the act of bathing becomes a form of seduction. When you return to the main chamber, hair damp, skin flushed, you blend easily into the crowd again. No one asks questions. In the Roman baths, privacy does not mean secrecy, it means acceptance. That desire is just another part of daily life, as ordinary as washing the dust from your skin. Romans idolized gladiators not only for their skill in the arena, but also as objects of raw desire. Archaeological graffiti from Pompeii shows women writing about their favorite fighters, admiring not noble birth, but blood-stained charisma. You stand pressed against the stone balustrade of the amphitheater, the roar of 50,000 voices thundering around you like a storm. The midday sun blazes overhead, baking the sand below until it glitters like gold dust. In that ring, two men circle each other, scarred, sweating, their blades flashing in arcs of light. Your heart pounds in time with the crowd's chant. Every strike, every block sends a shiver up your spine. It is not only the fight that captivates you, but the spectacle of the bodies themselves. Powerful shoulders straining against leather harnesses, thighs slick with sweat, eyes sharp with the promise of violence. You are not alone in this hunger. Women in fine stolas lean forward, lips parted. Men whisper bets but never take their eyes off the fighters. A sudden clash of steel rings out, and one gladiator stumbles, blood welling on his arm. The crowd howls approval. You gasp, but not out of pity. The sight of blood, the rawness of pain worn like an ornament, ignites something inside you. This is not the polite beauty of marble statues or painted frescoes. This is living flesh, mortal and dangerous, and it awakens desires as old as Rome itself. When the fight ends, one man sprawled in the dust, the other raising his sword to the emperor. The arena erupts. The victor, chest heaving, stands in a halo of sunlight and applause. Around you, whispers spread like wildfire. That one, the Thracian with the scarred jaw, I would sell half my dowry just to touch him once. You realize his fame is not limited to combat. For some, these men are more desired than senators or poets. That night, you wander the narrow streets near the gladiators' barracks. The smell of wine and roasted meat fills the air. Outside, a crowd gathers, nobles in silks, commoners in plain tunics, all waiting for a glimpse. The victorious fighter emerges, his wounds freshly bandaged, his skin gleaming with oil. He is no longer just a warrior. He is a prize, a fantasy made flesh. You find yourself ushered into the shadows, drawn by the murmurs of those who have bargained for more private encounters. Coins change hands quickly. Gladiators may be slaves, but in this exchange they hold power, valued not for freedom or rank, but for the magnetism of their bodies, their scars, their defiance of death. Inside the dim chamber, the fighter strips away his armor, revealing not the brutality of battle, but a different kind of strength. The air is heavy with sweat and wine, but also anticipation. As he steps closer, the arena seems to echo in your ears. The chants, the cries, the pounding rhythm of desire and violence intertwined. When he touches you, the calluses on his hands scrape against your skin, a reminder of blades, shields, and survival. There is no illusion of gentleness here. Every embrace carries the memory of combat, every kiss, the taste of iron. For a moment, you are not in a bedroom, but in the arena itself, conquered and yet triumphant. By dawn, when the fighter returns to his barracks, you realize the truth of Rome's strange obsession. Gladiators are not merely entertainers. They are vessels of lust, walking symbols of life balanced on the edge of death. And it is precisely that closeness to mortality that makes desire burn so fiercely. In imperial Rome, lavish banquets often blurred the line between food and sex. Satirists like Juvenal mocked the way noble feasts turned into stages of indulgence, where dining rooms doubled as arenas of desire. The villa glows with lamplight as twilight drapes itself across Rome. You step into the triclinium, the great dining hall, and are overwhelmed at once by the scent of roasted peacock, honey-drenched figs, and heavy incense curling from bronze burners. Reclining couches line the polished marble floor, each draped with cushions embroidered in crimson and gold. Tonight is no simple meal. Tonight is theatre. You recline on a couch beside nobles whose rings flash in the candlelight. Slaves flit about silently, pouring Falernian wine into your cup until it overflows, staining your fingers purple. Across the room, musicians pluck lyres, their notes rising and falling like a sigh. Conversation begins innocently enough. Politics, gossip, tales of the Senate, but soon the air thickens. The host, a senator swollen with pride and wine, claps his hands. The servants appear not only with trays of oysters and dormice stuffed with herbs, but with boys and girls trained to move like dancers, their tunics deliberately loose. Laughter fills the room as guests feed one another morsels with sticky fingers. The act of eating itself becomes sensual, every bite exaggerated, every swallow suggestive. As you nibble on honey cakes, you notice couples slipping behind silk curtains, disappearing into alcoves where shadows ripple like water. The smell of food mixes with something more primal. A woman beside you leans close, her breath warm as she offers you a grape between her lips instead of her fingers. You hesitate only a moment before accepting, the fruit bursting sweet and tart on your tongue. The table erupts with applause. The evening spirals further. Exotic animals, parrots, monkeys, even a chained panther, are led through the room, symbols of Rome's vast dominion. With each new display, inhibitions dissolve. Guests strip down their silk garments, their jewels clattering to the floor. The couches that once bore reclining diners now bear tangled bodies. You feel swept into the tide. A stranger's hand brushes yours, then another. Wine sloshes, staining the mosaics beneath your feet, but no one notices. You hear a senator's wife shriek with laughter as she pours an amphora of wine over her own chest, inviting others to lap it up. A poet composes verses on the spot, shouting over the din, words of desire tumbling in rhythm with the lyre. By midnight, the feast has lost all pretense of civility. The servants, once silent, are dragged into the chaos, no longer carrying platters, but carrying out acts demanded by drunken masters. The scent of meat has long faded, replaced by the musk of sweat and perfume. You can barely remember what dishes were served. What lingers is the rhythm of laughter, moans, the flickering torchlight that makes every shadow look like a writhing figure. As dawn seeps through the shutters, you stumble into the cool garden, your body heavy with wine and exhaustion. Behind you, the triclinium still hums with noise, a den where food and flesh fused into one endless indulgence. You realize Rome's feasts were never about nourishment. They were about appetite in its purest, most unrestrained form. In the port city of Corinth during the Roman era, the temple of Aphrodite was rumored to house hundreds of sacred attendants, women who blurred the boundary between worship and commerce. The climb up the Acrocorinth is steep, your sandals scraping against the ancient stones. At the summit, the temple glows in the dawn light, its marble columns streaked with pink and gold. You pause at the gates, the scent of incense thick in the air, mingling with another fragrance, perfumed oils, myrrh, and rosewater. You step into the courtyard and realize this is not just a place of prayer. Women move gracefully between the columns, their garments flowing, jewelry catching the morning light. They greet visitors not with solemn chants, but with inviting smiles, their gestures both reverent and suggestive. Worship here is embodied, flesh entwined with faith. A priestess approaches, placing a wreath of laurel on your head. She whispers a prayer to Aphrodite, then leads you past an altar where offerings of fruit and coins are piled high. Beyond, a chamber opens, its walls painted with scenes of lovers entwined beneath divine gazes. Candles flicker, throwing shadows that dance like figures on the walls. You lie upon a low couch draped in purple fabric, and the woman sits beside you. She is not hurried. Every movement is deliberate, ritualized, as if scripted by centuries of tradition. She speaks of love as sacred, of union as offering. To give yourself here is not considered sin, but sacrifice, an exchange of flesh for favor, pleasure for divine blessing. Around you, murmurs of other pairs drift through the air, mingling with the low hum of prayers. The entire temple feels alive, vibrating with the rhythm of voices and bodies. You are aware of the paradox, holiness and desire fused, temple and brothel indistinguishable. Yet the Romans did not sneer. For them, this was an old practice inherited from Greeks and beyond, a spiritual economy that placed the body at the center of worship. As you leave, coins clink into the temple's treasury. You glance back at the marble columns silhouetted against the sky. You understand why sailors, merchants, and governors alike climbed this hill. They came not only to honor Aphrodite, but to fold their desires into ritual. To touch flesh was to touch the divine. By the 1st century AD, Rome was flooded with performers from the East, Syrian dancers, Egyptian musicians, whose sensual routines shocked conservatives but thrilled audiences. The torches flare to life in the triclinium, the grand dining hall, where senators recline on couches and sip Falernian wine. You are among them tonight, a guest in the villa of a wealthy merchant who spares no expense to impress. The food is gone, the tables cleared, but the true entertainment is only beginning. At the far end of the hall, musicians lift reed pipes and tambourines. The sound is unlike the stately Roman marches you are used to. It is faster, syncopated, with a rhythm that demands the body move. Then she enters, a dancer from Syria, wrapped in gauzy fabrics that shimmer with each flicker of torchlight. Her bare feet slap softly against the marble floor, bells tied around her ankles jingling in time with the beat. You lean forward as her hips sway, her arms describing circles in the smoky air. With every turn, the fabric slips a little lower, her body revealed in flashes that make the men around you murmur. The women present avert their eyes, but you can feel their unease. This is not the demure performance of a Roman matron. This is something older, primal, designed to stir the blood. The music grows louder, the beat faster. She twists, drops to her knees, then arches backward until her hair brushes the floor. Gasps erupt around the room. Coins clatter as guests toss them at her feet, the silver glinting in the torchlight. She gathers them up in her skirts, spinning again, and suddenly you realize she is looking directly at you. Her gaze is not shy, but commanding, as if to remind you that though she performs, she also controls the room. This spectacle, so common in Rome by now, is not mere entertainment. It is an import, a cultural current flowing westward along the veins of empire. What was once ritual in the East, movements meant to honor gods of fertility and passion, has been repackaged here as dinner amusement for jaded aristocrats. For Romans, who prided themselves on discipline and order, these dances represented both temptation and corruption. When the performance ends, the hall erupts in applause, men calling for more, women whispering their disapproval. You leave the villa that night with the rhythm still pounding in your ears, and the image of a body moving with unashamed sensuality burned into your mind. You understand why senators argue that such dances are dangerous. They unravel the tight laces of Roman restraint and remind everyone that beneath the togas and titles, people are still animals of desire. Roman baths were not only for hygiene, they were social hubs. Historians note that gossip, politics, and illicit encounters often mingled in the steam. The heat envelops you the moment you step inside the thermae. Steam curls upward from great stone pools, and the air smells of oil, sweat, and faint traces of sulfur from the heated water. Men of every rank recline on benches, senators with rings on their fingers, merchants with thick purses, slaves fetching towels for their masters. You are just one more body in this tide, stripped of toga and title, reduced to bare flesh in the communal ritual of bathing. At first, it feels almost innocent. You wade into the tepidarium, warm water soothing your skin as attendants scrape sweat and grime from your back with curved strigils. The chatter of politics surrounds you, debates over grain shipments, whispers of who might inherit an estate, wagers placed on the next gladiator games. But in the corner of your eye, you notice something else. A cluster of men and women, their laughter sharper, their gestures more intimate than casual conversation should allow. As you linger in the caldarium, the hottest chamber, the atmosphere shifts. The air is thick, bodies pressed closer together. A young man, barely more than a boy, brushes past you, his touch lingering on your arm. Across the pool, women lounge in pairs, whispering behind their hands and glancing at you with knowing smiles. The baths, it becomes clear, are not only for cleansing, but for connection of every kind. You wander into the dimly lit laconicum, the sweat room. Here, shadows dance on the walls, and the boundaries of propriety dissolve with the rising heat. Senators who thunder about morality in the forum are here, their bodies glistening as they indulge in whispers and touches they would never admit to in daylight. Attendants move discreetly, guiding newcomers to private alcoves hidden behind marble screens. What begins as a bath ends as something else entirely. Leaving the baths, you feel both refreshed and unsettled. On the streets outside, citizens hail the thermae as marvels of Roman engineering, massive complexes with soaring vaults, heated floors, and libraries. Yet you carry with you the memory of what truly happens in those steaming chambers. To bathe in Rome is to expose not only your skin, but your secrets, to recognize that desire does not wait for the privacy of night, but flows freely where bodies gather. Archaeologists have uncovered hundreds of Roman defictiones, curse tablets, many invoking gods to inflame lust or force affection. Magic was intertwined with love and desire. You sit in a cramped room lit only by the flicker of an oil lamp. The walls are hung with herbs, dried rue, wormwood, and fennel, whose sharp scent bites your nostrils. Before you, an old woman bends over a lead tablet, her fingers tracing strange marks as she mutters in half-whispered Latin and Greek. You clutch a strand of hair stolen from the woman you desire, your heart thudding with a mixture of shame and desperate hope. The sorceress scratches words into the tablet. Let her body burn with longing. Let her dreams be filled with his face. Let her sleep be restless until she comes to him. She pours wine onto the ground, mixing it with ashes, and adds a doll made of wax, its limbs bound with thread, its chest pierced with a bronze pin. The doll is meant to be your beloved, held fast by invisible chains. In this dim space, you realize the Romans believed desire could be compelled, as though passion were not a choice, but a force of nature to be twisted and harnessed. You are told to bury the tablet in a graveyard, close to a fresh corpse, so the restless spirit will carry your command to the underworld. You obey, shivering as you press the cold lead into damp soil, whispering her name like a prayer and a curse at once. Days later, you see her again in the marketplace. Her eyes linger on you longer than before. She seems distracted, her speech faltering, as though her thoughts are elsewhere. Is it the spell? Or is it merely your imagination? Your desperate need to believe you've bent the world to your will? In the Roman mind, the boundary is thin. To them, magic works because fear and desire themselves give it power. As weeks pass, you find yourself changed too. The act of spellcasting has tied you to her in ways beyond reason. You cannot look at her without remembering the wax doll melting under flame, the whispered chants of the old woman. Even if the spell has no power, the memory shapes your every encounter, creating a bond of obsession and guilt. The Romans lived in a world where gods might listen, spirits might obey, and passion itself could be forced with the right mixture of words and ritual. It was a dangerous comfort, offering a sense of control in a life where marriages were arranged. Love was fleeting, and status determined whom one could touch. Through these whispered spells, you taste the illusion of mastery over love, yet also glimpse how desire, once forced, becomes as haunting as any curse. Graffiti in Pompeii shows women declaring their passion for gladiators, calling them suspirium puellarum, the heartthrobs of the girls. The crowd roars around you, the air thick with sweat, dust, and the metallic tang of blood. You grip the edge of your tunic tighter as you lean forward from the wooden bench of the amphitheatre. Below, two gladiators circle each other in the sand, their bodies gleaming with oil, their muscles taut in the afternoon sun. But you notice something more than combat. Women in the seats nearby are whispering, their faces flushed, their eyes fixed on the fighters with a hunger that goes beyond admiration for skill. You realize that gladiators were more than entertainers. They were objects of desire. Their scars, their dangerous aura, their defiance of death, all transformed them into forbidden symbols of virility. As you watch a Murmillo swing his heavy sword, you hear a matron gasp as if struck herself. One woman beside you clutches a small amulet, murmuring that she would gladly trade her wealthy husband for just a night with the fighter who might die tomorrow. Later, in the dim corridors of the arena, you stumble upon whispers of secret exchanges. Rich women slipping coins to guards, arranging clandestine meetings with their chosen gladiators. To the upper classes, gladiators were despised socially, ranked barely above slaves. Yet the same society was electrified by the allure of men who fought with death as their partner. You hear tales of women leaving their homes, scandalizing families, to follow gladiators like lovers follow poets. The contradiction is dizzying. These men are condemned and celebrated, reviled and worshipped. For some, bedding a gladiator is an act of rebellion against rigid Roman respectability. For others, it is the ultimate thrill, the brush with mortality itself. You feel it too, as you watch the victor stand over his opponent, chest heaving, blood dripping down his arm. In that moment, the amphitheatre is not just a place of sport. It is a stage for fantasies too primal to be admitted in daylight, yet impossible to ignore. The Romans lived in contradictions, and you now see how lust could turn a battlefield into an erotic theatre. Desire and death were inseparable, and the gladiator's body became the vessel for both. As the crowd disperses, you wonder who will leave with him tonight, whose desire will cross the boundaries of law and class, only to be whispered about tomorrow as yet another scandal painted on the walls of Pompeii. In elite Roman dining halls, feasts weren't just about food. Writers like Petronius describe banquets where indulgence in desire matched the excess of the platters. You are seated on a cushioned couch in a triclinium, the three-sided dining hall reserved for Rome's wealthy. Oil lamps flicker on the walls, their glow illuminating platters piled high with roasted peacock, stuffed dormice, and honey cakes shaped like mythical beasts. The scent of spices from India and cinnamon from Arabia lingers in the air, a reminder of Rome's reach across continents. But tonight's feast is not about nourishment. It is about display, about pushing human indulgence to its very limit. As the evening progresses, you watch servants pour wine into goblets of silver, mixing it with honey to make it thick and sweet. The air grows warmer, voices louder, and laughter slips into something darker. A woman draped in silken fabric begins to sing, her notes rising above the din. When she finishes, she casts her garment aside, and the room erupts into applause. Others follow her lead. You realize this feast is not merely a celebration of food, but an orchestrated theatre of excess. Everywhere you look, boundaries blur. Senators recline beside their mistresses. Patrician women whisper in the ears of musicians, and slaves move between guests, offering more than platters of fruit. The host claps his hands, and a troupe of actors enters, not to perform a comedy or tragedy, but to mimic the gods themselves in scenes of divine seduction. The audience cheers as if Jupiter and Venus had come to life in the chamber, their myths played out, not as sacred tales, but as entertainment that teeters on the edge of transgression. You try to eat, but your gaze is drawn to the spectacle. A young man beside you leans closer, whispering that these feasts were designed as stages for indulgence. The food itself was often secondary, chosen for shock value. Fish so large they barely fit on the platters, meat dyed to unnatural colours, desserts shaped like phalluses. The real purpose was to astonish the senses, to blur the line between appetite and lust. As the night deepens, the room becomes less a dining hall and more a theatre of excess. Reclining bodies move closer together. The couches that once separated, guests now serve as stages for whispered exchanges and stolen touches. Somewhere, a senator, one of Rome's most respected men, sings off-key, his toga slipping from his shoulder, while his hand lingers too long on his neighbour's thigh. No one protests. In this room, indulgence is the rule. By the time dawn breaks, the triclinium reeks of wine, sweat, and smoke. You stumble out into the pale Roman morning, your ears still ringing with laughter, your eyes haunted by what you witnessed. In Rome, feasting was never just about eating. It was about consuming everything: food, drink, pleasure, and even dignity, until nothing was left but exhaustion. Roman temples weren't always solemn places of prayer. Ancient sources hint at rituals where worship and sensuality blended, especially in shrines devoted to fertility gods and imported cults. You find yourself walking through the Forum Boreum at dusk, the cattle market that also housed some of Rome's most ancient temples. Torches flicker against marble steps as priests and priestesses prepare for an evening rite dedicated to Venus, goddess of love and desire. The air is heavy with incense, its sweet smoke curling upward, as if trying to touch the heavens. Around you, crowds gather. Not all pilgrims, but also those seeking something beyond prayer. A priestess, her body draped in translucent linen, lifts her hands to the altar. She chants in Latin, her voice steady, but filled with a rising intensity that makes the crowd hush. Behind her, musicians begin to play slow, rhythmic notes on flutes and drums, the sound weaving through the temple like a living pulse. You feel it in your chest, a rhythm that quickens your breath without your consent. As the ritual unfolds, worshippers step forward, laying offerings of fruit, flowers, and coins at the base of the statue. Yet the offerings are not the true climax of the night. You watch as men and women, both noble and poor, are drawn into the performance itself. Some begin to dance in the torchlight, their bodies swaying as though possessed by the goddess herself. The boundary between spectator and participant dissolves until the temple floor is filled with writhing bodies moving in rhythm to the drums. Man beside you whispers that this is an echo of the sacred marriages once practiced in older cultures, rites where priestesses embodied goddesses and ritualized unions symbolized fertility and abundance. The Romans, pragmatic as ever, had adapted such traditions into their own festivals, though always with a veil of secrecy. In public, they called it worship. In practice, it was something much less divine and far more human. You hesitate, torn between fascination and revulsion. The marble columns, once symbols of purity, now cast long shadows over acts that blur the line between ritual and indulgence. Somewhere, a priest pours wine over the altar, its crimson rivulets running like blood. Across the stone, the crowd erupts in chants of Venus Victrix as couples collapse into each other's arms, their worship transformed into abandon. In this moment, you realize that Rome's strength lay not only in its legions and laws, but also in its ability to absorb, transform, and justify even the most human of desires. A temple could be a place of solemn vows or a stage for transgression, depending on the god invoked and the crowd gathered. By the time the torches burn low, the temple is a place of exhaustion. Some kneel in prayer, others lie on the floor in silence, and still others laugh as if leaving a tavern rather than a holy site. You step outside into the cool night air, the stars above sharp and indifferent. Behind you, the chants fade, but the image of sacred ritual collapsing into desire lingers in your mind. By the fall of the Roman Empire, foreign observers often describe the city not by its laws or its legions, but by the decadence of its banquets and the rumours of its bedrooms. You stand on Palatine Hill, gazing down at the ruins of the city that once called itself eternal. The marble is cracked, weeds grow where senators once debated, and the whispers that remain are not of triumph, but of scandal. You hear them in every crumbling wall, stories of emperors who married their own sisters, senators who traded loyalty for pleasure, and temples where offerings of devotion were indistinguishable from indulgence. Imagine arriving here as a foreign envoy from the East in the 3rd century. You would have expected discipline, laws, and the might of legions, but instead, you find a society that masks appetite with ritual. A priest explains that an orgy is not debauchery, but a sacred honouring of Venus. A magistrate shrugs at accusations of incest, calling it dynastic necessity. A philosopher calmly notes that to conquer the world, Rome must also conquer shame. You realize that the city survives not because it resists corruption, but because it normalizes it, embedding desire into every corner of civic life. You walk past the Circus Maximus, imagining crowds of 250,000 cheering not only for speed, but for spectacle. After the races, you picture the banquets spilling into the streets, wine-soaked revelries where senators decided policy in the same breath they demanded more dancers. This is a city where political power and sexual license feed each other, where pleasure is both a currency and a weapon. As you leave the ruins, the comparison is unavoidable. Rome was not alone in its excesses. You think of the harems of the Abbasid caliphs, of the concubines of Chinese emperors, of the temples in India where ritual intimacy was woven into stone carvings. Humanity, it seems, has always blurred the line between power and pleasure, between worship and desire. Yet Rome carried this to a theatrical extreme, turning every appetite into performance, every act into spectacle. The smell of incense clings to you as if the rituals never ended. You can still hear the sound of flutes from Bacchic festivals, the laughter of courtesans in dimly lit villas, the heavy breath of senators whose decisions shaped nations even as they collapsed into indulgence. Rome's legacy, you realize, is not just in aqueducts and roads, but in its stark reminder that civilization and decadence can grow side by side, feeding one another until the empire itself is consumed. Comparative reflection, 200 words. Rome's sexual practices were not isolated sins of a few emperors, but reflections of a society that used desire as a political tool and as a means of control. Compared to medieval Europe's rigid morality, Rome seems lawless. Compared to modern times, Rome seems almost theatrical in its embrace of public spectacle. Yet in truth, the patterns repeat. Rulers across civilizations have wielded intimacy to consolidate power, and societies have often excused the indulgences of the elite. The difference lies in scale and openness. Where other cultures hid, Rome flaunted. Where others whispered, Rome performed in the open forum. It is this audacity that etched its practices into history, not because they were unique, but because they were unapologetically public. Standing among the ruins, you understand that Rome's greatness and Rome's grotesquerie were intertwined. The empire that built roads across continents also built chambers of excess. Its glory and its shame are inseparable, and its story remains a mirror for every civilization that believes itself immune to the corruptions of power and desire.